Today, we shall speak of the first among 10,000, the right hand of the Emperor, a man of 1,000 names, and possibly the principal threat to chaos in the 42nd millennium, known as Constantin Valdor. The origins of Constantin Valdor are shrouded in darkness. According to Amar Astarte, his real parents were killed by the Emperor, who took their child and made him a custodes. In general, Amar Astarte is an intriguing source. It should be recalled that she was a scientist of terror during the Unification Wars and essentially contributed to the creation of the Adeptus Astartes. How so? Well, she was the greatest geneticist and worked for various tyrants of old Terra, creating many different super soldiers for them. However, all her attempts ended in failure, as all the warriors she created eventually either died due to defects or perished in battle. At some point, the Emperor found Astarte and appointed her as the first director of his biotechnical division, which worked on creating space marines. It was within its walls that the Thunder Warriors appeared first, followed by the Primarchs, and of course the Adeptus Astartes, named in honor of her contribution to their creation. In essence, Astarte claimed that the Emperor killed Valdor's parents and took their child for himself. Valdor himself knew practically nothing about his past. And despite being considered the first custodes, there are essentially no verified facts of this information. Most likely he was simply the first successfully created custodes. Amar Astarte knew not only where Constantin was, but also his real name. And of course she told no one. She herself was convinced that she knew more about Valdor's early life than he did, and he didn't need to. He was literally deprived of interest, listening to everything the Emperor told him. From the very beginning, Valdor was created to accomplish genuinely important work for the Emperor. He was present at virtually all serious battles during the wars on Terra, for instance, the Battle of Mauland Sen. It was not the Emperor's first campaign on Terra, but nevertheless it was indeed a grandiose battle. The Emperor personally led 30 custodes, several thousand Thunder Warriors, and 22 regiments of the Imperial Army, who paid no heed to the cold. And he led them against the Mauland Sen Confederacy, founded in Scandinavia by the priest-king of Mauland Sen. Here is what Valdor recounted in the protocol of High Lord Adeptus Arbitis Uwoma Kandawira. Mauland Sen was not the first state we conquered. It was located too far from our fortified centers of control, yet I think he paid special attention to it from the beginning. This alliance indeed stood out among many abominations. We heard all the stories and studied the intelligence reports. He knew this place. He had been there before. For the transcript, by he, it is meant the Emperor, of course. He knew what was going on there, and he wanted to completely eradicate it as soon as the opportunity arose. Understand, that was always the goal, even in those early years. We were not merely waging battles for territory, we fought to erase the remnants of witchcraft from the face of Terra. I see your smile, but yet again this is not well understood now. Perhaps this is the consequence of our success. Say witchcraft now, and you will be met with skeptical laughter. But in times of anarchy, there were different beliefs that led many to moral decay. The human soul, if left unsupervised, tends to morally degrade, and this opens doors. For so long, no one watched over this world. Many doors remained open. Mauland Sen was a kingdom of witches on the very roof of the world. It was hard to imagine a realm so close to a nightmare. It combined the worst elements of the Dark Age. There were neither laws nor a hierarchy of the strongest nor true science. It was merely a conscious indulgence in ignorance and disorder. They managed to preserve scraps of knowledge and use them for vile purposes, giving themselves a semblance of military might. In reality, it was so fragile that it began to crumble as soon as we invaded. I compared their military strength to the ash trees from the long-forgotten legends of this land. The trunk was as solid as iron, but the core was rotten. He knew the kingdom could be destroyed, even when advisors recommended caution. The order was given, and thus it happened. In the Battle of Mauland Sen, an entire legion of storm warriors participated, led by their Primarch Ushotan. To be precise, it was the 4th Legion, known as the Iron Lords. It is interesting that Constantin Valdor claimed to admire their Primarch Ushotan. In his opinion, he was indeed a great warrior. I experienced neither pleasure nor fear from the battle, but this did not extend to Ushotan's warriors nor to the enemies. Both were fierce. Our enemy was called the Priest King. He named himself this, and the name suited him perfectly. His followers were fanatics, maddened both by combat stimulants and the lies fed to them by the Priest King. In some way, even in this cold desert, they acquired technology from a forgotten era and learned to use it, or it was shown to them. The results were simply abominable. We fought against beings stitched together, as if mocking the human form. Some were seated within machines, pulled into battle by pain stimulators. Many of those we fought had to some extent been moulded into something else. They traded human dignity for untamed power. The cities situated on the border we conquered rather quickly, as the Priest King's infection was weaker there, but the centre of the Confederation was always deep within the country, on high peaks, where the wind carried shards of ice across the skies. We established a foothold in the valleys to the southwest and flew in shuttles to secure our supply routes to the north. The operation unfolded far from our home, but we had our primary advantages: technology, confidence, and energy. And just a month later, we were already planning how to break through further. As I have already said, the terrain was always against us. The unenhanced warriors suffered from severe exhaustion, and this was unavoidable. The further we advanced north, the more soldiers lost their minds. Voices were heard in the wind, and the cold was unbearable. Those who perished met us again along the way in the form of ghosts, and this unnerved the soldiers. If we had brought only them, we would not have been able to continue the campaign. This was not an unforeseen circumstance, and it merely emphasized the need for genetically crafted units. According to Constantin Valdor, the disease was everywhere in Molen Sen. It hung in the air and could be tasted. For him, all of this was disgusting. But for Ushotan and his Thunder Warriors, it was different. It seemed as though they temporarily became stronger. And Valdor decided that they had some capacity to strengthen themselves thanks to everything they encountered. The last fortress of Molen Sen was erected among the mountains. It had been prepared for invasion for many years, illuminated from behind by a greenish light, and its black walls glistened. According to Valdor, it was a truly perverted masterpiece, exuding pain in every corner. Plus, they were constantly haunted by ghosts walking through the snow, ghosts of slain soldiers and those who had died here long ago. Ushotan made the first leap forward, and as soon as he was inside, a slaughter began that I could not even have imagined. Not all of the Priest King's people were corrupted. Some were listless servants, others could be saved, and they could have worked productively for the Imperium. But in this, however, the Thunder Warriors showed their greatest weakness. They resembled the munitions we used at the time, powerful but unstable. Once the Kataegis were unleashed, they were difficult to control. They poured in like a tide, sweeping everything in their path. The Thunder Warriors demonstrated, at that moment, the absolute power of genetically enhanced soldiers. If we had wished to assure ourselves of their valor, we could not have had a clearer example than this. And yet both sides suffered enormous losses. It seemed senseless. I spoke with Ushotan after we had finally taken control of the citadel. The building's roofs were smashed and the walls had turned into piles of rubble. It was already far into the next night. The whole day had passed in battle and we could barely look up to notice it. I remember his armor was covered with frozen blood, his helmet was torn off and his arm was broken. A new storm began and the battlefields were covered with fresh snow, hiding the tracks of grey slush we had seen. When I found him, he was laughing. His eyes emitted a bright light. I thought he resembled the spirit of all killings. What did he say? He told me that for the first time he realized why he was created. He said I would never feel the same, and that for this he pitied me. What did you reply? I was troubled as far as I remember. Not because of his comment or implied insult, but because of a feeling. I felt as though we had unleashed something that would be difficult to keep within acceptable bounds. Predicting what happened next is not difficult. As you've already understood, this was the moment when Ushotan and his Thunder Warriors went mad and began a true massacre, killing everyone they saw, both servants and their masters. Understandably, the mad tyrant was eventually killed by the Emperor, and those who survived were spared and integrated into the new Imperium. Well, those who were not mutants, of course. But personally for himself, Constantin Valdor realized that the end was soon coming for the Thunder Warriors. They were simply impossible to control. Although all this seems strange because the Thunder Warriors were already very unstable and could just die on the battlefield, plus they aged much faster than the current Astartes and sooner or later would have disappeared anyway. Many attribute this to the fact that they were recruited from adult mercenaries, but it's unlikely that a genetic genius who had seen the entire dark age of technology could make a mistake as a result of such a choice. The Emperor definitely knew that sooner or later he would have to get rid of the Thunder Warriors. He was just preparing various options. Official information states that all the Thunder Warriors perished in the last battle of the Unification Wars, but in reality they were simply betrayed and destroyed. The moment it became clear that Terra was under the Emperor's control, this happened precisely on Mount Ararat. Serving as the sword in this battle were the first created Adeptus Astartes, also known as the Angels of Death, who, with a squad of several thousand custodes, led by Constantin Valdor, carried out a ruthless culling of the unstable Gene soldiers. You know what's most interesting? The Thunder Warriors were truly strong, and in this battle hundreds of custodes perished. Naturally, the Thunder Warriors were still destroyed, but you understand, the consequences of the great slaughter remained under the snow and soil of Mount Ararat, and this later echoed back to Constantin Valdor. Another task for Constantin in those years was the assassination of the minister of the Anuatan Steppes, who, in the opinion of the Emperor, had committed an unforgivable crime and was unworthy of life. The fact is, on Terra in those years there was one very valuable resource, and it was not land or any precious gems, it was water. Minister Koshazu decided to take control of the region's water, for which she was supposed to die. She indeed had many miscalculations. She engaged in purges within her ranks, traded organs, and even created her own enhanced warriors. Understandably, the threat to the Imperium was minimal, and the Emperor did not even touch her at first. But when her machines dried up the last ocean on the planet, the Emperor ordered her execution and to take her young son, who was to atone for her guilt by becoming one of the Legio Custodes. Constantin Valdor killed Koshazu and took her child, Ra Endymion, for himself, and he, as is well known, completely atoned for his guilt by becoming the vessel for the demon Draconian at the Emperor's request. Constantin Valdor was always a faithful son and the right hand of the Emperor of mankind. Therefore, when the Imperium gained power, he entered the ruling triumvirate along with the Emperor and Malcador. He carried out affairs that could benefit humanity. Often he uncovered various conspiracies that harmed the Imperium, but one day he encountered a situation that confounded him due to moral principles. This was about the moment when the High Lord of Terra, the First Lady of Adeptus Arbites Uoma Candawire, who advocated for honesty and truth, conducted an investigation and discovered thousands of skeletons of Thunder Warriors and their armor on Mount Ararat. But there were not only their armors, there were also the armors of the Custodians. And then various thoughts began to creep into the mind of Uoma Candawire about whether Constantin Valdor, the Emperor's ruling hand, lived outside the law, while the new Imperium was a place where people should be protected, even from those like him. And the only thing that could truly protect them was the law. If the mighty of this world broke the law, they must be judged. And she, of course, fearing Valdor to death, initiated the investigation and periodic interrogations, during which she learned many interesting things, let's say, the story about Morland Sen, and the moment how they tried to save the Emperor's developments in the dungeons of the Terra Palace after Erda provoked a small warp storm. The peculiarity of this investigation was that Uoma was not concerned whether the Emperor was to blame for the death of the Thunder Warriors, or if it was all due to Valdor's ambitions. She was determined to figure out what was happening and nothing could stop her. In fact, Uwoma Kandawaya already knew who was guilty. To protect herself, she gathered all the outcasts, mercenaries, enhanced soldiers, all who had no place in the new era, and involved the Primarch Ushotan, as well as the remaining Thunder Warriors eager for revenge. Yes, Uwoma conspired a coup. In the absence of the Emperor and Malkador, she planned to detain the first of the 10,000, along with his custodians, and put him on trial. She took this step after a conversation with Valdor, directly asking him whether there were other generals who could defend the Imperium, and there were none, he answered honestly, but withheld information about the Astartes army. The right hand of the Emperor, a member of the ruling Triumvirate of Terror, of course, knew well about the conspiracy. He had been watching it for quite some time and wanted to see what it would lead to. To him, these were just another bloody game, a first test and, of course, very bloody. It all happened at night. Ahead in the darkness, through the falling mire, tens of thousands of lumens shone. The high ridge beyond the plateau was completely occupied. It was filled with infantry and heavy armor, lined up in a long, ragged line. Valdor's augurs recorded the impact radii of numerous weapons. Many appeared primitive and ancient, yet their power commanded respect. The host formed a semblance of an embassy, consisting of 24 Thunder Warriors, hobbling in their battered old armor, alongside a small figure in an inflated protective suit, and the Primarch Ushotan, as radiant as in the days Valdor remembered him. Curiously, he alone could move without pain among all the Thunder Warriors. His dark golden armor still retained fragments of its former brilliance, and the company's sigils were still discernible beneath the stains of dried blood. The power armor belched clouds of smoke from a crate-like reactor pack, and the creak of its servos was audible even through the wind. Valdor stated that Ushotan's end was inevitable one way or another, and it would be better for him not to seek death here. But Ushotan was ever the humorist and remarked that even by Valdor's standards, it sounded rather arrogant. Kandawaya stepped forward, swaying in the wind. "Do you know why this is happening?" she said. Her voice crackled due to the burdened vox. "A crime against the state, annihilation of loyal forces to retain control over the Imperial war machine. By the mandate of my office, you must relinquish command of the city immediately and open the gates. You will be tried by an open and honest court. Your fate will be determined by the Emperor when he returns." Valdor nodded. "I understand," he said. "Did you ever consider making these demands in our last conversation? And would you have complied?" "Of course not!" Ushotan laughed again. "That's why we're here," he roared. "Every able-bodied person harboring a grudge or a thirst for revenge, and there are many here. You could not cleanse us all, not perfectly. That must really eat at you." Icy rain washed over Valdor's golden helmet, rolling down the grooves of its ornamentation like tears. His weapon, a massive spear, remained deactivated and ominous in the darkness. "The High Lord merely acts as she deems necessary," he said, addressing Ushotan. "But you served with the Emperor himself. You must understand how pointless this is." Ushotan shrugged, causing flakes of rust to scatter from his chipped shoulder plates. "More pointless than dying of bad blood? I think not. I'd rather die seeing my blade sticking out of your back, Constantin. That would be a good way to go." "Only if you resist," Kandawaya interjected worriedly. "Yes, of course, only if you resist," Ushotan echoed sarcastically. "You could come inside with us right now and we could resolve this without a single shot. But I don't think you're going to do that, are you?" "You know I cannot." "Don't be a fool," Kandawaya blurted. "There are too few people in the city. Your order is scattered by war. Resistance will only lead to slaughter. With all due respect, High Lord, you have led it to slaughter. All the deaths of this night will be on your conscience." "Conscience?" Ushotan grumbled in surprise. "Can you still remember what it means to have it, yes?" "Stand aside, General Captain," Kandawaya continued to insist. "Order the gates opened. You will be judged according to the Lex, and if you are not guilty, then you have nothing to fear." "Leave," Valdor said to Ushotan. "This is the only chance you will have." "We both know that is not true. I will not take pleasure in seeing you killed. You take pleasure in nothing because you are a ghoul. But I will kill you, Ushotan, here if I must." The Primarch laughed loudly, casting aside his cloak and gesturing to the empty plateau. "Alone?" he asked doubtfully. "Will you take us all on? Alone? For the gods' sake? You have become—" "Resistance is futile, General Captain," Kandawire added, her voice now reflecting the utmost degree of despair. "Despite everything you have tried, all the weapons you have gathered, we know you are too few. You yourself told me no new armies. All that remains for you stands here and now, and that is not enough." For a moment, in the time between breaths, Valdor fell silent. In that moment he appeared genuinely broken or even humble, cast into the heart of an infinitely black night. "You did not listen to me, High Lord," he said, activating his spear. A halo of silvery golden light burst forth from the displacer field generator, blinding like forked lightning. "But had you learned the lesson I taught you, you would already know the real truth. There are many more armies more deadly, more numerous than any that have existed before." Ushotan swung to strike with a blade spewing blood-red plasma, and yet something stopped his hand. Something stopped the hands of every Thunder Warrior. Amidst the roar and thunder of the furious storm, something else suddenly sounded, something familiar and unfamiliar at once, something terrifying, torn from the past and yet even more nightmarishly defining the future. It was a howl, the hum of mechanisms, a wave of something vast and coordinated amidst the whirlwind of storm and chaos confusing the senses. "You should consider this an honor," Valdor said, effortlessly shifting his spear into a combat stance. "You are witnessing their first battle." And in the moving wet mist of the icy storm, where snow and mud roared and the frozen ground cracked, 10,000 helmets suddenly lit up and advanced. Then began a truly fierce battle. The crowd of the last free men of terror, raiders, mercenaries, thunder warriors, faced the Emperor's new army. Valdor was deadly as ever, but Ushotan did not yield an inch. He struck with his saber, oozing raw plasma from the displacer field at Valdor's Apollonian spear, leaving dirty streaks of this foulness on the armor, while his power pack smoked. The other Thunder Warriors did the same, bursting into enemy lines and discharging their weapons before swinging their crackling blades. Meanwhile, reinforcements arrived, cresting the mountain. A multitude of tanks ploughed through grimy snowdrifts, firing from their twin-linked lascannons. "What manner of creation is this, Constantin?" Ushotan shouted, cutting one down and stepping over a lightning-charred corpse. "They fight as though they suffer from constipation just like you." Valdor understood what he meant. They were still green and inexperienced. Their bodies bled from their latest implants and their muscles rankled at the first marks of power armor. Their minds were infantile, emptied by imperfect psychic conditioning, while their weapons had only recently been bound to machine spirits and auxiliary systems in tactical helms. So much commotion, so many potential defeats, yet they were poised to win the battle, for they acted with unity, already striking terror. "They are the future," Valdor grimly replied, piercing a staggering Thunder Warrior with a series of thrusts from the Apollonian spear, leaving parts of organs and metal plates at his feet in a smouldering heap. "Angels of death." Well, well," Ushotan remarked, breathing heavily as he swung his broad falchion. "I do not like them at all." Valdor found himself admiring that humour, blunt as a stick. He always appreciated that trait in the Thunder Warriors. Humanity had not been extracted from them to transform them into what they were. Their emotions were not dull, nor were their dreams ripped from their consciousness and left to wither away. He wanted to agree with this thought, to respond with something that would make them both smirk crookedly together, as was fitting for warriors, but, as usual, he couldn't think of anything appropriate. Everything he had at his disposal were the facts of the matter and the artifacts of duty. "Neither do I like them very much," Valdor pronounced, piercing through the plated gauntlets and helm of an Imperial soldier before launching himself at an already wounded Thunder Warrior. "But nonetheless they are here. I suppose you should have foreseen their arrival." "Ha!" Ushotan replied, stabbing another angel with his blade and casting its convulsing body aside. "We always sensed something significant was occurring. He didn't take us for fools, or perhaps he did. It's foolish to have agreed with this for so long." Now he, staggering, approached Valdor, hacking his way through with the habitual coarse obstinacy. Despite all this, the Primarch had sustained damage. These foes, the angels, were unlike the prey in power armor he had so disdainfully dispatched before. Each of them fought to the end, and they would eventually have seized him, like a pack of wolf bears. But Valdor did not allow this to happen. "You had no choice," Constantin said, breaking through to the Primarch, and with majestic poise pivoted on the spot to finish off Ushotan's last bodyguard. All around the two leaders an unbridled battle raged, although the relentless march of the Angels of Death was grinding down the spine of the enemy's counter-assault. None of us did. "You say that as though you regret it," Ushotan replied, advancing awkwardly towards him, holding the blade with two hands in an idiosyncratic, straightforward manner. "Don't tell me you've changed your mind." For the first time, they crossed weapons. The sword tip screeched against the spearhead, and the force of their clash scattered a dozen fighters around them. After that, they fiercely engaged one another, striking, parrying, slashing and testing. "I regret nothing," Valdor spoke, pushing Ushotan back with a sharp motion. "Only because you can't remember how it's even done," Ushotan laughed, straining his back. Despite his weakness and the damage sustained in battle, he was still a volcano of raging energy, opposing the dying light. "And yet I've always wondered what it would be like to fight you." Valdor ripped away his pauldron, tearing through the metal, thus exposing the bloody flesh. He then delivered a blow that could have taken the Primarch's head off, but he dodged at the last second. "Many have pondered the same question," Valdor noted, thrusting Ushotan back several steps. "That's what they told me." Ushotan's shoulders slumped, and he spat blood. Despite this, he continued wielding the blade, continuing to press Valdor and block his strikes. "I suppose death claimed them all," he spat, trying to muster another grim smile. "In the end it will come for each of us, but not for you," Ushotan responded, retreating and putting all his strength into a sudden lunge which the Apollonian spear momentarily halted, holding him in a crackling net of excess electrical charges. For the first time their faces were so close, without the mask of pure gold and the crude iron grill of the helmet. "I always knew you would outlive all of us, because I saw what you did with the rest of us. Those angels will fight for you at this moment, but one day they will understand who you are. They will see that you come for them, but it will be too late. We are all expendable, each of us whom he created for these wars. Everyone except you." "I am nothing," Valdor objected, finding that he spoke these words more fiercely than he intended. "Merely a tool to be discarded once it has served its purpose." "And what purpose? Do you even know it? Or are you just playing along, hoping it becomes obvious later?" In that moment, Valdor spotted an opening, a weakness of tired arms, heavy with lactic acid. He lunged, swung the spear, and delivered a precise mortal blow. Ushotan attempted to parry, and almost succeeded, but the attack was simply perfect, and the flaming edge of the weapon pierced the Primarch's breastplate, sending him reeling backward. Ushotan roared, gripping Valdor's spear shaft and trying to free himself from it. But by that time the splitting charge had already spread through the Primarch, incinerating what remained of his armor and burning the body from within. Valdor cast him onto the snowy ground with the spear's shaft. A devastating strike sent a wave rippling through the surroundings, shattering Ushotan's spine. Angels clad in grey marched forward with cold-blooded composure towards them both, pushing the last of the Primarch's ragtag armies back towards the mountain ridge, leaving behind burning hulks of vehicles and frozen corpses. Valdor deactivated the disruptor field of his spear and knelt beside his victim. He drew a long dagger from his belt. Ushotan, upon seeing this, let out one last dry chuckle. "Mercy, is it?" His face contorted in pain as he rasped. Black poison veins were visible on his exposed skin up close. "The final insult! You always were a pathetic bastard!" Valdor placed the blade of the knife against his adversary's heart. Around them snow fell in brown flakes from burning promethium. "I said what I meant, Lord Primarch," he stated. "I take no pleasure in this. You are one of the finest commanders. And who will lead your new toys now? Will they have commanders of their own? No, they are lost." "Ha! All the better for you. The High Lord of Terror was right. You cannot stand competition. It was not my fault." "Of course not." Ushotan gulped convulsively, coughing up thick blood. "You know, when we were at Morland Sen and I said I pitied you, I wasn't joking. I wasn't trying to enrage you. I truly pitied you." Valdor placed his hand on the dagger's hilt and paused for a moment. "I lived, Captain General," Ushotan rasped. "It was brief and painful, but I swear by all 9 circles of hell I lived, I would rather have it so than as you. No joy, no hate, no fear. Unyielding, undeveloping, immortal, without passion. As Valdor prepared to press the blade, he suddenly glimpsed the distant future. A state torn from reality into the cold halls of unknown time, where the galaxy itself was mired in battle, and whole worlds were cast into flame. A future where wonders and madness broke free, screaming through the arch of reality. A future where the very tenets of physics cracked under the hungry flow of terrifying absurdity, and he remained unchanged, as cold, pure, immovable, and incapable of feeling anything but omnipresent pressure and eternal responsibility. "What is left in you, Constantin?" Ushatan breathed heavily, bubbles of blood seeping between his charred lips. "What could he take from you that he hasn't already taken?" Valdor took a deep breath before driving the dagger in, ending the Primarch's torment. For a moment, he stood still, head bowed, as the storm raged around him, covering the ground with a thin layer of pale grey falling snow, and slowly withdrew the dagger. "Nothing," replied Valdor almost inaudibly. "Absolutely nothing." The Uwa revolt was quelled, achieving nothing whatsoever. Amar Astarte stealthily aimed to destroy the laboratories, but the Emperor had made copies of all research after the battle with Erda. The attackers were completely annihilated, but not Uwa. Constantin Valdor spared her because, in his words, she was in many ways right, not in relation to him, but about the Imperium as a whole. Valdor himself claimed he did not desire power. Uwa eventually ended her days as a farmer on Terra, having of course hidden the recording of the conversation with Constantin Valdor and sending it away from Terra along with her assistant, after which she was never seen again. Constantin Valdor, however, continued his work. If one is to believe the dubious tale of Alfarius, it was he who organized the blood games of the Adeptus Custodes. These are events during which the custodians test the defense of the imperial palace and, incidentally, sometimes perish in the process. The custodians train in the art of assassination, attempting to infiltrate the emperor's palace clandestinely. In this way, the custodians learn the breaches in the defense system and seal them. Almost always, one or several custodians are absent from duty, participating in the blood games. According to Alfarius, they began during his first encounter with Valdor. The Emperor and Malcador did not inform the first of the 10,000 about the discovered Primarch so that he might train in stealth. And one day, Alfarius killed one of the custodians, dressed in his armor, then breached a weapons battery, and arrived at the platform where the Emperor was supposed to land on his shuttle, thus demonstrating that he could not only reach the Emperor upon arrival, but could have shot down his shuttle while it was still in the air. According to Alfarius, Valdor, of course, saw through his plans and nearly had the upper hand. However, the appearance of the captured weapons batteries was a complete surprise. Thus were the blood games organized to prevent similar situations in the future, although, of course, the words of a Chaos-affiliated Primarch should not be entirely trusted. Overall, when information appeared that the Primarchs might be alive, Valdor did not believe that the Chaos gods could have spared them, and if it were true, the bodies of the Primarchs would likely have been corrupted. He proposed, together with his custodians, to lead an army of mortals and, under the Emperor's guidance, plunge into the Great Crusade. But the Emperor did not wish to pursue this. The custodians have an interesting feature. It is said that within the name of every custodian lies a list of all his great deeds. Starting from the custodian's original name with each feat, this name grows. Another is added, reflecting the warrior's deeds. Thus, even during the Great Crusade, Constantin Valdor had 1,932 names, and by the 41st millennium, it is assumed that the book recording his name filled an entire tome. And it was worthy of recording, considering Valdor was essentially the Emperor's eye and participated in the most critical events for the Imperium. Yes, during the Great Crusade, Valdor encountered a substantial number of traps, but the harshest for him was the mission on Prospero alongside Leman Russ and the Space Wolves. They were to hold Magnus accountable for breaking the promises made at the Council of Nicaea, which forbade the use of sorcery. Let us recall that Magnus had sabotaged the Webway project for the Emperor of Mankind, who was very keen on seeing him brought to terror. Thus, Constantin Valdor, the Custodes and the Sisters of Silence joined the punitive expedition of Lemon Russ, which consisted of 50,000 sons of Fenris. It's interesting to note that Valdor remained neutral regarding the Council of Nicaea because he understood that some psychers were indeed important, astropaths, for example, and navigators. Magnus the Red, however, believed that psychers should be ubiquitous, literally everywhere. And so, after the Council of Nicaea, he continued practicing sorcery and received a prophetic vision showing him that Horus, the emperor's favoured son, had turned traitor. How could he not warn his father? Hence the long-standing debates, did Magnus betray or not? Understandably, the Legio Custodes always had a contract for execution in the form of the Magisterium Lex Ultima, a decree which bound them to answer only to the emperor and no one else. Nevertheless, Valdor had never undertaken such a severe mission before, but he did eventually set off. Ultimately, as you know, the accusatory host engaged in a bloody conflict with the Thousand Sons on Prospero. Accounts by chroniclers describe the meetings between Russ and Valdor quite differently. The fact is, they had disagreements, since Russ was designated as the fleet's supreme commander, and he was resolute in his decision to kill Magnus. Valdor, however, believed that doubts should not impede a task entrusted by the Emperor. Indeed, the wolf decided that he would best serve the Imperium by killing Magnus. Valdor, on the other hand, was determined to adhere strictly to his orders and capture the Crimson King alive. In the end, Valdor acquiesced to Russ, chosen by the Emperor as the commander of the accusatory fleet. However, relations between the two leaders remained tense throughout the battles for Prospero. Something else united Russ and Valdor: spears bestowed upon them by the Emperor of Mankind. These spears, according to legends, were crafted by the Emperor himself during the Wars on Terra. The spear was passed to Valdor after he received the mantle of the chief custodian. Since then, the spear belonged only to him. Like any other Custodes spear, it included a bolter. It's quite convenient, by the way. Valdor's body was adorned with the custodian armor, a powerful suit crafted individually for each Custodes, regardless of resource consumption or component rarity. In the 42nd millennium, custodian armor represents the pinnacle of martial craftsmanship. Even the creations of Belisarius Cawl pale in comparison. The armor is crafted from rare auramite alloy, which was also used for the Emperor's armor. And of course it contains various power fields and refractor generators. Inside it, two long spears revolve. Each is covered with power mechanisms and energy conduits. They are immense, far too large for the hand of an unaugmented human, thus marking them as harbingers of future events. These spears are promises, two shards of fate to be cast into the raging sea. Malcador gazed at them for a long time, studying each line and balance point. These grim instruments glowed with a thirst for destruction. Even without a guiding hand, they embodied a craving and a capacity for killing. "Do they have names?" Malcador asked in a voice not yet hardened by long years and disappointments. "Two equivalent blades," came the answer from the smoke. "Refracted, reflected. Its source is inconstant. Two principles, ecstasy and restraint, change and constancy, Dionysian and Apollonian." Malcador smiled. "Old gods for a godless world, it will not remain godless forever." Perhaps. The sigillite leaned closer, raising a thin grey hand to the curves of the handles. "Will you wield them yourself?" he asked. "For a while, but they will not stay with me." "Then who?" The smoke shifted as laughter echoed through it. It was strange to hear mirth escape those lips. They would one day fall silent, frozen in an eternal agonized scream, but for now they could still laugh. "Opposites," answered the figure in the smoke, raising a hammer above the anvil and returning to new work. In a certain sense. Of course, Valdor had met Russ before Prospero, let us say in the region known as the Wheel of Fire. There, the 6th Legion, having refused aid from the regiments of the Imperial Army, decided to conduct a series of rapid assaults on the system, despite the odds being 100,000 to 1. Space Wolves fought against orcs there, who, as usual, revelled in the events. The war lasted 5 standard years, its pace never slackening, its fury never waning. The legion's losses, both in warriors and ships, were terrifyingly high. Almost a third of the legion perished before the deed was done, and the Wheel of Fire did not become a charnel ground, it was a true test, a proving ground for the new legion. It was here that Russ and Valdor met. It was after this that Russ received the Dionysian spear as a gift. The Captain General of the Legio Custodes does not acknowledge gifts and rewards, for his entire existence is service without reward or price. He views the victory ceremony with a certain humility. Lord Russ is granted a citadel, the likes of which none of his brothers would receive, and which, it seems, is destined to accumulate sorrows in the future. Besides this, considering the losses the Primarch voluntarily bore to fulfill the Emperor's command, he is given a weapon. Valdor observes as the Wolf King accepts the spear and notes his hesitance. Russ seemed stung, almost pulling back his hand from the grip, then clasping it too firmly, apparently out of bravado. Much later, both these feelings merge into one. All over the camp, sounds of carousing and brawls spread, and Russ's chin glistens with spilled drink. The blade is no longer in his hand. "Constantin!" Russ bellows, slapping Valdor on the shoulder. "I suppose you won't drink?" Valdor smiles dryly. "More for you," he replies. "You will take it to battle, won't you?" The face of Russ immediately assumes a sullen expression. "Blood and teeth," he mutters. "You'd spoil a Jarl's wedding night. Be careful with him. I say this as a friend." Russ looks at him with a somewhat clouded gaze. "The fight's over, and I have my sword." He spits on the ground. He only did it so Ferrus would be envious. "Have you spoken with Ferrus? Can you find common ground?" Valdor scrutinizes the Primarch closely. There is the usual bravado, but also something deeper, a genuine antipathy. Russ hates this weapon, and he also hates Valdor, or at least what he represents. And Valdor regrets that, because as much as such emotions mean to him, he quite likes the Wolf King. "Our spears are twins," declares Valdor with a few final words before Russ, with a ceremonious air, heads into the firelit darkness. "Both carry truth. Though I know not what yours bears, mine is no easy burden." Russ stares at him for a few seconds, his open mouth glistening, his icy blue eyes inflamed. "I am not going to use it," he finally says. "I'm not even going to keep it with me. You can keep your blades of fate and spiraled swords. I'd rather use bare fists than that thing." "But heed what it tells you," Valdor warns Russ, who is staggering towards where the drink flows. "I have my Jarls for that," Russ slurs. "Goodbye," Valdor responds, this time barely audible. In short, overall relations between Valdor and Russ were respectful, but nevertheless, anti-loyalty was discernible. Constantin Valdor, together with the Custodes, obliterated many of the strongest sorcerers of the Thousand Suns on Prospero. He literally clashed with 30 elite Kennetai blade masters who could foresee the future. And Valdor killed each of these deadly warriors, suffering only a single wound himself. Interestingly, Russ for a long time did not allow reinforcements of the Vulturine force led by Valdor to join the battle, and later communication with him became difficult. Therefore, Valdor subsequently ordered everyone to regroup and directed the second wave not for direct or immediate reinforcement of Leman Russ, which would strongly indicate the failure of the first assault, but for a strike on the orbital loading docks of the Tizca, thus drawing the Thousand Suns away from the Space Wolves to repel an attack from a new direction. After some time, he was already marching through the ruined streets of Prospero at the head of the Custodian Guard, and without hesitation gave the order for general deployment of the forces available to him, the Imperial Army, the Legio Custodes, and the Silent Sisterhood. Out of the detachments of the Space Wolves that remained in reserve in orbit, most preferred to await the call of Russ. The second wave of the assault was to break through to the north via the Palatine Mansions to join Leman Russ and his first wave, and then advance eastward to capture the Great Sesostриan Canal, which stretched from the Valperine Sea to the pyramids of Domus Tenebrae and Praefunium Aeternus, located in the city centre. The problem was that Russ had only 3,000 Sisters of Silence at his disposal, which would suffice to cover only a small part of the forces thrown against Tizca. Therefore, Valdor decided how to proceed. Either distribute the sisterhood among the accusatory forces' squads to provide some protection to all but leave the sisters vulnerable to being eliminated one by one, or concentrate them in a few units, thereby reliably protecting those from the enemy's sorcery, while exposing the rest of the army. Without the luxury of prolonged deliberation and genetically programmed not to experience the indecision typical of ordinary humans, Valdor ultimately chose to gather most of the Silent Sisterhood under his banner within the units of the Legio Custodes. The plan was to break through the Thousand Sons' defences and unite with Leman Russ, and then, under the cover of the remaining sisters, launch joint offensives on the city centre. A small detachment of the Sisters of Silence remained in the orbital transfer docks to safeguard them from psychic subversions and create a fallback position in the event of a forced retreat. But the remaining commanders had to handle the sorcery of the Thousand Sons on their own. If you think the accusatory forces succeeded successfully, it was not quite so. All they achieved was taking the Palatine mansions. The Adeptus Custodes faced overwhelmingly numerous sorcerers who, in better times, could capture a world with 100. Here it was like this: 6,000 legionaries of the Thousand Sons against 500 custodians and 2 vigils of the Sisterhood. Yes, each custodian killed many legionaries, but the odds were against them. Of course, Valdor also joined the battle, and within a few minutes the Thousand Sons holding the approach were slaughtered. But victory did not come easily for the custodians. Valdor was wounded, dozens of custodians fell, though given their colossal endurance, few were unable to rise again. Most critically, about 500 Sisters of Silence, needed to contain the Sons of Magnus, were killed in the battle. By this point, the losses for the Thousand Sons amounted to nearly 30,000 legionaries, which was considered approximately half of the known strength of the legion. Any captured or left wounded Thousand Sons warrior was finished off on the spot. In general, the accusatory forces also lost a comparable number of fighters. Clearly, an event of such significance as the burning of Prospero deserves a detailed analysis, but you probably remember the gist. Leman Russ reached his brother, and on the far side of the armour-clad pyramid, Valdor and his elite Aquilon Terminator squad were preparing for the final assault, together with the Varangi of the Space Wolves, while the warriors of the Black Cull were positioning thermal charges along the wall to create a new breach. Valdor's order was simple. Everything within the pyramid must be destroyed with the maximum sanction. Take no prisoners. Why such an order? The situation there was extremely dangerous due to the powerful sorceress activity, and he could not leave anyone alive. When Leman Russ finally defeated his brother and raised his axe for the final blow, Photep's pyramid was suddenly engulfed in bright light. It burst from within the structure in blazing beams that blinded even the most powerful auspexes and built-in visors. In a matter of moments, a storm surrounded the pyramid, and howling winds lifted debris, space marines and even tanks into the sky. Ghostly laughter and mortal screams echoed through the ruins. The flow of time distorted, and through the haze of reality, ethereal entities broke through, attacking the vanguard forces of the Imperium, and began devouring the wounded warriors. In some places, marble walls flowed like water, and the distorted corners of reality cut like swords. For a few brief seconds, it seemed as if Magnus, in his final act of vengeance, destroyed the universe itself. Valdor immediately ordered a retreat, which did not particularly help because chaos and confusion reigned in the forces of the Imperium, and no one could see beyond a few hundred feet because of the whirling debris and blinding light in the hurricane, desperately enduring the onslaught of wind and the claws of unseen monsters. Then everything abruptly quieted. Only the husk of Photep's pyramid remained. Everyone inside disappeared with it as nearly 20,000 Astartes and their auxiliaries fled with Magnus to Sorcerer. The battles with the surviving Thousand Sons continued for another 3 days. All these 3 days, Russ refused to leave and searched everywhere for Magnus and his sons, while Valdor began the evacuation of the Imperium's forces, which lasted an entire day. The wounded and scattered units of the Imperial Army, the vigils of the Silent Sisterhood, and the phalanges of the custodians gathered at the orbital transfer docks for transportation to the ships. The accusatory host ultimately lost 49,000 people. Considering that the Thousand Sons' goal was not to destroy anyone, they were merely defending themselves. One way or another, the Emperor's order was fulfilled. In this battle, among Valdor's feats, the rescue of Bjorn can also be highlighted. Valdor severed his hand to prevent the Thousand Sons' Psyker's corruption from overtaking his body. Although in the book, The Burning of Prospero, this honour seems to belong to Caspar Hauser, the conservator historian of the Space Wolves. Upon returning to Terra, Valdor informed Aemon Tauromachian that Horus had betrayed. Understandably, no one could believe it, and he asked Valdor how this could have happened. Valdor, as a man who knew Horus Lupercal very well, declared that it could not have been his pride or hatred. It was simply that for some reason he had gone mad, as had his closest advisers. "Dawn is fortifying the palace for war," said Aemon, stating a fact more than asking a question. Only a custodian of the First Circle could speak so directly about a Primarch. "Is war expected?" "Then it is expected," said Aemon, "and before was it never expected?" Constantin did not respond. "What happened?" Aemon asked. "I don't know what to say," replied the chief custodian. "I know the War Master well, and I do not believe that his pride or ambitions inspired him to this disgrace and outrage. I think—" "What?" Aemon asked, fastening the buckle on his abdominal plates. "I think Horus Lupercal is ill," said Constantin. Something has clouded his sound thoughts and those of his advisers. "You think Horus Lupercal is mad?" asked Aemon. "Possibly mad or ill, or both at once. Something has happened to him that cannot be explained from the perspective of our understanding of the universe, and we want to understand what it is." Constantin looked at the high windows of the House of Weapons, studying the line of the western shaft, recently fortified with mighty metal shields and armed platforms. "We must be ready for anything. War comes to us. War from within. The participants have made their choice." "That is too prosaic," said Aemon. "Indeed it is," replied Constantin. "The Emperor is threatened. We are his protectors. We will face the threat. For us nothing remains but to ponder the madness of those we once loved." Aemon nodded. "The palace has become a true fortress. I approve. Dawn has performed his task excellently. It has always been his skill and the skill of his Astartes. Guarding and defending, in this the Imperial fists surpass all others. But we remain the last line," Aemon said, "and we will do all that is necessary. It is much more than mighty fortifications and crenellated walls." After the discussions, Valdor ordered Aemon to check on the hereditary lord of Hebrasil, named Ferrum Sikhar, whom the custodians had always suspected as a traitor. Sikhar was one of the 50 most powerful feudal lords of the colony. He even planned to join the Council of Terra, but Malcador the Sigillite, as usual, took the necessary measures, and he was not accepted. What worried Valdor was that Sikhar was a direct descendant of Dalma Tekin, one of Terra's last tyrants, who simply hated the Emperor and fought against him. The Emperor paid him no heed because he knew his business. But his loyal warriors were seriously interested in him, and the problem was that Ferrum Sikhar knew his place. He was against the Emperor, but he strove not to betray himself. And this precisely aroused suspicion. Feroma, by the way, was ultimately not killed by the Custodes. Most likely, he was disposed of by his own masters. As you may recall, Magnus broke through the psychic defences of Terra and disrupted the Emperor's secret project, the Human Webway, which was being created from a lost branch of the ancient Webway on Terra. The Emperor thought he could rid humanity of travel through the warp. But Magnus's intrusion shattered all wards that restrained the hordes of demons. It was then that the battle in the Webway occurred, when the ancient demon Dracanyan was imprisoned in Ra Endymion, who later became Abaddon the Despoiler's sword. Yes, indeed, the Adeptus Custodes engaged in a fierce struggle with the demons. Captain General Constantin Valdor took a place in Terra's War Council alongside the Sigillite, Rogel Dawn, Fabricator Locum Trimagia, Carrier of the Silent Sisterhood, and Fabricator, General Zagreus Cain. The issue with Horus needed resolution somehow, and Constantin Valdor was tasked with leading the first-ever execution strike team in history. An entire team of assassins from different temples was assembled. The Eversor, the Calidus, the Vindicara, the Culexus, each given the task to unite and kill Horus Lupercal. It was initiated, of course, by Malcador the Sigillite, who covertly led the Assassins' Council. He was the invited master of assassins. The goal was, of course, to complete the mission, to kill Horus. When Rogel Dawn learned about this operation, he confronted Valdor, asserting that at least Horus was predictable, and they knew what they were up against. Killing him would make the rebellion unstoppable, and power within their circle might become even more unpredictable. The debate lasted long. Dawn insisted on adhering to a moral code, claiming that sending assassins was a vile act, likening them to the War Master himself. Ultimately, the argument was settled by the Emperor himself. The darkness which concealed the far corner of the room like a vast curtain began to disperse, and when the unnatural gloom vanished, the floors and walls became distinctly visible. Strangely, he had looked directly at that point, but saw nothing. This corner was in everyone's view, including his own, yet he noticed nothing unusual. But now a light emerged from the darkness. A majestic figure effortlessly dominated all around, and such a powerful storm of emotions raged on the patrician face that even the mighty Primarch of the Imperial Fists froze for a moment. The Emperor of Mankind wore neither armour nor adornment, only a simple garment of grey cloth threaded with fine golden and scarlet silk threads. But despite this, he presented a regal spectacle. Perhaps he had heard their conversation from beginning to end, but it seemed incredible and unnatural that a being so great and vested with power could be present in the room among humans, Astartes, and the greatest Psyker, yet still remain unnoticed. But before them stood the Emperor himself, and this was the ultimate answer to all questions. The father stepped towards him, and Rogel Dawn bowed his head, and at last followed the example of the others, kneeling before the Master of Mankind. The Emperor spoke not a word. He crossed the sanctuary and approached the tall window shrouded with a canvas curtain like a cataract. With a sharp movement of his mighty hand, Dawn's father bunched the fabric into his fist and tore it aside. The cloth came off the rod and fell to the floor, while the Emperor continued his circuit, stripping away the draperies until the room was filled with the golden radiance of the Himalayan dawn. Dawn dared to lift his head. The golden rays, as if caressing, settled on his father. For a moment the light seemed to him like a shining armour, but then the Primarch blinked and the vision faded. "No more shadows," said the Emperor. His voice was gentle and kindly. Passing by Dawn, he placed a hand on his shoulder. Then, with the same gesture, he greeted Valdor. "No more veils." The mission to assassinate Horus ultimately failed. Horus had been warned of the attempt, and he replaced himself with a trusted lieutenant, who was ultimately slain. The one killed, for the record, was Captain Luke Sedire of the 13th Company of the Sons of Horus. Vindicare Aristide Kell executed the sentence. In retaliation for Sedire's death, the Sons of Horus unleashed their full wrath upon the world of Dagonet. Before this, there had been a chance for him to return to the bosom of the Imperium as a result of a pro-imperial rebellion. But in the end, the planet's entire population was annihilated. Therefore, the decision to send the assassin was not the wisest. As you may recall, the Custodian Guard suffered yet another setback. The Emperor dispatched most of the Custodes into the webway in an attempt to curb the invasion of demons, while he sat upon the throne and the black ships tried to resolve the situation. Valdor, of course, did not participate in the battle. He took up a vital position in the War Council with Malcador and Rogel Dawn. At some point, Valdor had another conversation with Lemon Russ, when the latter decided not to partake in the defense of Terra. Instead, Russ set off to slay Horus. Constantin Valdor brought him the Dionysian spear, which he disliked and tried to avoid using, as you know, and this time he left it on Terra altogether. At that moment, Valdor stated with absolute calm that Russ, being one of the most ambitious adherents of the Council of Nicaea, continued to use rune priests, It was not so much a denunciation, just a statement of fact. Allegedly, ambition ruined Horus and pride Magnus, and now Russ was demonstrating both. The Dionysian spear eventually came in handy for Russ. He nearly slew Horus with it. When the traitors commenced a full-scale assault on Terra, the Legio Custodes fought alongside the Loyalist legions to defend the Emperor, his palace, and the Imperium as well. Valdor personally led the remaining 10,000 and valiantly repelled one assault after another. Valdor dispatched Amun Tauromachion to investigate demonic activity within the palace. It was then that Amun encountered Euphrati Kila and her imperial cult, and then arose the question of what to do with them. For it was true worship of the Emperor as a god, and it allowed her to wield real magic. You do remember the Emperor of Mankind's demons, don't you? She was one of the first at that time. Do you propose to kill her? Valdor asked this question with not the slightest hint of surprise or judgment. Did I understand you correctly? Yes, Captain General. If she is the source of the demonic disruptions, they will cease. If not, at least we will stop the rise of a dangerous anti-imperial demagogue. They walked in silence for several minutes. Aemon knew not to demand an answer from his commanding officer, but instead he reconsidered his own execution plan, should Valdor request it. They were almost at the gates of the Senatorum Imperialis, when Valdor replied, "No, Kila must not be harmed." It was not in Aemon's nature to doubt the judgment of his commanders, yet he couldn't help himself. What will we gain by allowing her to live? The enemy of my enemy. Valdor stopped about 50 meters from the steps leading to the closed gates. Two custodians stood watch on the perimeter. Their golden armor was partially concealed by white surcoats, indicating they were serving as Malcador's bodyguards. Horus has sent an assassin after Kila, Valdor continued. As long as she doesn't pose a proven threat directly to the Emperor's safety, I am guided by this fact. If the renegades wish for Kila's death, I believe it is in our interest to preserve her life. It is quite possible that it is precisely for the actions we are now witnessing that she was ordered to be killed. I had not considered that, Amun admitted. I will take command of the broader fight against the demons, alongside the Silent Sisterhood. He raised a finger to stop Amun's next words. This is not a warning, just practicality. I need you focused on the task. The threat has spread far beyond the original target of your inquiry. Therefore, I order you to concentrate your efforts solely on that first target. Study Kila, the lightning bearers, and determine definitively if there is a connection between them and the attacks of the Neverborn. If there is, we will deal with it accordingly. If not, we can utilize them and avoid unnecessary distraction. Amun knelt again, this time out of gratitude for a revived sense of purpose. I obey your will. After the fall of the Lion's Gate spaceport, Constantin Valdor led the defense of the Colossi Gates alongside Jagatai Khan and Rogel Dawn, battling hordes of abhorrent demons. This was part of Dawn's plan. He asked Valdor to lead the Custodes at the Colossi Gates, although Valdor declared that he had only one duty, to protect the Emperor. But Dawn explained the situation to him. At the Lion's Gate port, Perturabo allowed Krieger to conduct his attack, and it cost the Loyalists dearly. Now Dawn wanted to do exactly the same, by deploying Jagatai and Valdor onto the field to add a variable into the equation, to show Perturabo what he was capable of. Of course, the main custodian forces remained to guard the Sanctum Sanctorum, but he took some with him nonetheless. Valdor and his custodians were slaughtering the hosts, pursuing the limping, fleeing Neverborn. They held the Guardian spears in one hand and cleaved legs and backs, severed hamstrings and split spines. Agatha's observations proved accurate. The custodians, more than other warriors, possessed some enigmatic property that allowed them to inflict true harm on the Neverborn. Valdor gripped the spear tightly, gritting his teeth and aiming it at the enemy. He steeled his mind. The Emperor had gifted him one of the most powerful blades from the palace arsenal, but the spear demanded its price. Each strike taught him something about the vanquished creatures. Each thrust of the spear imparted knowledge that deepened his understanding of the primal destroyer. The golden spear made him a greater warrior, yet the precious lessons were not easy even for him to bear. Now he was learning from the not fully formed Neverborn. Valdor gathered his strength and continued to strike. Demons fell, stumbled, shrieked, sprawled in the mud and clung to it. The Golden Riders turned and attacked again. They delivered lethal blows with the blades of their spears, pierced with pikes, or shot the fallen with laser weaponry. Some custodians dismounted and mercilessly strode towards the mangled prey. Grasping the gleaming spears with both hands, they raised them overhead and drove them into the demons. The Neverborn could not die, but their new bodies of flesh were maimed by the battle magic of the Storm Seers. The custodians' strikes, directed by the Emperor's will that blessed them and coursed through their arms and legs, cleaved through demonic flesh and hewed massive bones. Black blood spouted like gushing oil. The Neverborn screeched and withered as the flesh they clad themselves in to enter the mortal world betrayed them, and they perished. Approaching Valdor's squadrons, the Khan slowed his jet bike. He watched the scene of surgical carnage flashing by. There was something surreal about it, something inhuman. The shimmering grav bikes, masterpieces of technology, hovering idly while their riders, majestic giants in gold, stood on the smouldering field and with supreme calm and exceptional efficacy showered blows upon the pitiful mangled carcasses of colossal beasts. They hacked, slashed and dismembered them into ever smaller pieces, though they had long been dead. The resplendent radiant gods mechanically cut down helpless foes, reducing them to shreds through cold actions of unrelenting disintegration, while apocalyptic lightning split the skies above them. It was the end, it was death, it was victory. Yet it was not the kind desired by Jagatai. It was brutally coarse and detached, a near ritual act of destruction that seemed unworthy of the demigods of the Custodes, as if they were indifferent flesh for some sacred offering. But it was victory. Valdor played a crucial role in the future of the Imperium a little later, when another interesting moment occurred. Basilio Foe, an ancient bioengineer who lived during the Dark Age of technology, escaped from the main prison of the Blackstone Palace during the siege. He, of course, adored bioengineering and gained fame for creating monsters, much like Fabius Bile. Only at that time, Fabius Bile did not yet exist. When the Emperor appeared on Terra, Foe immediately departed, claiming he did not want to be anywhere near him, and settled on a small planet located near Ulanor. Of course, the Great Crusade later arrived there to battle the Orcs. Naturally, after the cleansing of Ulanor, the Space Marines began purging the nearby planets as well. Thus the Fourth Company of the Lunar Wolves found Basilio Foe. His monsters performed so well in combat that Horus himself took an interest and arrived on the planet to kill him. After defeating all the monsters, Horus started a heart-to-heart with Foe. He declared that Foe created abominations and was overall quite vile. In response, Basilio stated that the most terrible monsters were created by the Emperor himself, namely the Primarchs, who would burn the galaxy to ashes. That is, Horus was a grotesque aberration and the most dreadful thing he had ever seen. He wished death upon Horus, but Horus did not kill him. Instead, Basilio Foe was taken to Terra and locked in Blackstone. During the siege of Terra, he escaped. Learning of this, Constantin Valdor immediately decided to handle the situation himself. Yes, indeed, he decided that Basilio Foe was a great threat. And not only he thought so, Valdor began hunting Basilio throughout the Imperial Palace, eventually rescuing Foe from some marauding Night Lord. He chose not to kill him, deeming that his knowledge could aid the Imperium in these grim days. Sometimes such decisions happen, you know. He decided to use Foe as a creator of a new bioweapon against the Adeptus Astartes, which Foe conceived while in prison. Naturally, he could not constantly oversee Foe, so he left him with his Custodes and departed on board the Vengeful Spirit with the Emperor. Basilio Foe, if you are curious, eventually created a virus and even managed to escape, adopting the persona of Zaranchek Xanthus. But without Valdor, the virus would not have come to be at all. If you think that they intended to leave him alive after creating the virus, that is not entirely accurate. There was a dialogue with Aemon, who asked if he had not lived long enough, so there were no alternatives. It is worth noting that by the time of boarding the Vengeful Spirit, Constantin Valdor appeared exceedingly fatigued. Dawn described him as tormented by an unknown and possibly indescribable pain. During the Siege of Terra, the Captain General of the Custodes appeared as though he had seen too much, which all things considered was logical. In this state, he accompanied the Emperor to Horus's flagship, where Valdor and his Custodes fell into Horus's trap. They found themselves in a dark abyss, surrounded by demons. The objective was clear. Horus wanted the Captain General to suffer, and Valdor felt a sensation akin to fear, but only because he feared being unable to fulfill his duty, to protect the Emperor. The main issue was that it was not entirely clear where they were. Were they really aboard the flagship of this traitor? Or had Horus shifted the teleport vector, displaced the exit point, or intercepted the signal? Perhaps he had sent them into the webway, or even into the warp itself. With a flash and a shower of searing sparks dispersing the darkness, Diocletian Koros fired one explosive bolt after another into a massive fanged beast. The density of fire was such that the matted fur of the creature caught flame. The Tribune was forced to expend precious ammunition liberally because the fanged creature was about to attack Valdor, who had not noticed. Distracting thoughts disrupted the Captain General's concentration. He thanks Koros with a nod, turns around and impales another Neverborn, a creature with a torso resembling a bloated body fused with the abdomen of a giant hornet with his spear. Valdor murmurs its name and restores the custodian's formation with neurosynergistic impulses. The number of demons continues to grow, the living darkness gaining flesh. He does not feel fear. He is not even angry. Although rage is a weapon Valdor always keeps ready at hand, the Captain General dislikes using it, for anger is a flaw typical of mortals. It is accompanied by a loss of accuracy and errors in judgment, but if necessary, this tool will come into play. Curiosity spurs the custodian. He must know he must. Not the names of the participants in this despicable carnival of murder. They simply lead him closer to the edge of the abyss where madness awaits. He needs to learn something important, something truly valuable, that will help him win or find the right enemy. Valdor raises his spear. It functions when it pierces flesh, even that made of ethereal energies. On inanimate objects the weapon does not work, but this deck is made of worm-ridden meat. Constantin thrusts the Apollonian spear into the floor or the ground or the decking or whatever it once was, a heartbeat, a secret, a name. Constantin Valdor shudders. 25 seconds have passed since the start of the battle. Vengeful spirit, he whispers. Constantin Valdor on the Vengeful Spirit was the primary target of the Justerin and Abaddon the Despoiler, naturally. He declared he would personally kill Valdor and his gilded monsters. The most amusing part was Erebus trying to dissuade him, claiming Valdor was the oldest weapon of the Emperor. His men, though few, are killing machines. Any one of them surpasses an Astartes. Hence Erebus proposed to Ezekiel to accept the gifts to match the power of the Custodes. However, the first captain refrained from utilizing the gifts Horus had accepted for some time. One way or another, Valdor encountered a group of elite Justerin Terminators led by Sicarus, and this encounter becomes a true trial for him. 6 Terminators pinned the Captain General against the bulkhead, while Sicarus's power fist clamped around Constantine's throat with his blade piercing the custodian's abdomen. Yet Valdor is not easily broken. He strikes the master with his fist on the head, and though the blade pushes deeper into Valdor's abdomen, he continues to strike. Ultimately, he shatters the faceplate of Sicarus's helmet, causing him to fall to the floor. Grasping the spear's shaft, Valdor leaps to his feet and assumes a combat stance. But the Justerins flee. It was a trap. Abaddon indeed accepted Erebus's gifts and now craves to kill Valdor. The situation changes as the ceiling ruptures, flooding them with daylight. Dark figures leap into the opening and assault them. One lands before Constantin. Although large and clad in heavy armor, he descends softly as though invisible forces gently lowered him. It is Abaddon. Constantin reacts instantaneously, faster than instantaneously. He directs his spear in a perfect strike under the arm that would pierce the traitor's chest. A lethal blow, a demonstration of the supreme speed and reflexes of the Legio Custodes beyond which no Astartes can withstand. Yet the spear does not reach its mark. A sudden stop jolts Constantin like the crack of a whip. Abaddon's left hand has closed on the spear tip, halting its thrust despite the immense force behind it. A few drops of bright blood seep between Abaddon's knuckles where he grips the spear's blade. Constantin, mouth agape in shock, freezes for a moment. One heartbeat. A stream of knowledge flowing through the spear. The world blurs, loses clarity. 25 minutes of battle have passed. An hour has passed. A year of struggle has passed. A century. 10,000 years have passed. War is never ending. This is a war that lasts for eternity. Swirls of smouldering embers, each representing a burning world, sweep past him. The entire galaxy is aflame. Knowledge transmitted through the spear's shaft into his soul. It's not the name of another dead man over whom Constantin gains command. It's not some secret of the warp or a fragment of knowledge he uncovers. He cannot control it. Everything he knew of chaos showed it to be something befitting its simplified name. Chaos. A frenetic, contradictory maelstrom devoid of singular impulse, bubbling without logic or motivation, consuming itself, waging war with itself. Myriads of its parts can both annihilate each other or direct their wild malice at real space and matter. The sensation is complete. It is whole. It is concentrated. This is indivisible chaos, focused into a single, incorruptible soul through immeasurable willpower. Constantin looked into the future from his time-lost vantage point in the heart of the vengeful spirit. He sees a distant future which lies 10,000 years ahead, a future that feels as if it has already arrived. This is chaos, subjugated and controlled, forged into a single deadly spearhead that will pierce the imperium of mankind and bring it ruin. The Black Legion, an unequivocal symbol of death. There is nothing else. There is only war. War and a single name, the worst fate that the deck of the Emperor's Tarot can reveal. "Despoiler," he whispers. The revelation is so abhorrent that Constantin recoils. He lets go of the spear. It is the one thing Abaddon does not expect from him. No custodian would ever relinquish their weapon, especially one so powerful. He lets go of the spear before Abaddon realizes it and drives his fist into Abaddon's face. The first captain slumps. He still grips the spear tip in his left hand. He swings it, seeking to push Constantin back. The captain general and the spear fall onto the deck. But the deck is no longer slanted. It moves. The debris of the orbital platform rotates. The deck becomes a wall. The wall becomes a deck. Unsecured objects and debris tumble and collide. Constantin falls onto the wall, but the turning continues. He rolls toward the breach in the ceiling. He rolls toward the daylight. It is a bright abyss yawning beneath him, and he dives into it. Reality bends and transmutes by someone's will. Yes, Valdor saw the truth about Abaddon and his millennia-spanning crusades, and who he would become. He was the first to call Abaddon the Despoiler. Sadly, around the same time, Sanguinius died, and all his blood angels fell into the berserk rage, turning into the fiercest Khornates the world had seen. Valdor was shocked at what he saw, but Dawn told him about Sanguinius's death, and he felt genuine sorrow. Together they eventually reached the court of Lupercal and found there Astartes Leto and Garviel Loken, the only survivors near Horus's body, and the gravely wounded emperor. The emperor could not speak. You know how everyone understood that he needed to be placed on the golden throne? They found the tarot card of the throne, which convinced Dawn, and the others, that the emperor was communicating in this way and needed to be returned to the throne. Usually, Valdor was skeptical of such signs, but this time he did not argue. Thus ended his vigil over the emperor. After the Siege of Terra, Valdor met with Lehman Russ, who had arrived at the palace in a very grim mood due to the recent events. However, Valdor told him not to worry, assuring him that the emperor had everything planned out, although Valdor was not completely sure of his words. Valdor's time in the Imperium ended as follows. At one point, he simply gathered his belongings, including his armor and spear, and left the palace deep into the night. Valdor raises his gaze. The candles in his room flicker out, disturbed by the cold wind with no place in Terra's humid atmosphere. Constantin looks out the window and first sees mountains, black, blue against the Proxima Finalis night. Then they again become the city spires, bequeathing their restoration to the productive forces of the throne world. So soon? he mutters. There is much he still wishes to accomplish here, for the galaxy lies in ruins and bleeds. Restoration must be undertaken properly. The surviving principles of the old crusade must not be allowed to die. And yet even his custodians forget much. But he cannot advise the Wolf King to do one thing while allowing himself another. Valdor was always bound by laws, even if they were crafted by him for himself. He rises and dons his armor. When he leaves the room, he leaves nothing behind. No sign, no message, no cryptic clue. Valdor slips away unnoticed, as the route has been prepared for a long time. And unlike Russ, he takes no companions. This is as it should be. He was never a sociable person. He glances back only once as his ship lifts from the platform. The heart of the old palace still exists, terribly damaged but structurally intact, and deep within lies entombed the one who created everything. Valdor gazes intently at the sarcophagus for a moment, trying to guess if he knew from the beginning how it would all unfold, or if it was, as is quite likely, a desperate gambit to halt unthinkable calamities. Once Valdor was almost terrified by the appearance of the Master's voice in his mind, knowing it would come only to command, but now in its silence, the custodian misses it. There are many kinds of loneliness, but even this, for one such as he, bound inseparably with his Creator, is among the worst. Only in death, Constantin whispers before leaving. And now the time is nearly gone. Two worlds stuck in the exhausted end of history. One at the heart of the decaying star empire of mankind, its weakness masked by rotting splendor. The other in the hinterlands, fearsome with primal myth and bearing the scars of recent sorcery, nourishing its melting ice. In each of these worlds there is a room, and in each of these rooms a blade, forgotten and hidden. Now both are silent, unkindled, forgotten. For so much occupies the minds of those who remain faithful, if not fully, to the dream of mankind's liberation from the grip of terror. One blade has been wielded many times by unworthy hands, the other never touched. And as for millennia before, they wait. Metaphysical blades, reflections of each other, tools of enlightenment for the owner and the victim, waiting in darkness for their masters. Opposites, as once was said, in a certain sense. Since then, the fate of Constantin Valdor remains unknown even to the Adeptus Custodes. Yet besides him, two more captain generals have since disappeared. In the 41st millennium, it seems that Constantin Valdor has re-emerged, appearing exceedingly powerful and having taken the moniker the King in Yellow. In fact, this information is still under scrutiny, but the likelihood that Constantin Valdor is indeed the King in Yellow is extremely high. The evidence lies in the discovery of Valdor's Book of Names, where the name Constantin Valdor is literally inscribed. It is believed that he is linked with extremely forbidden practices. For instance, Valdor was involved with the Cogniti school, which trained supervillains and heretics. Although that was in the past, he is also allegedly attempting to learn the Emperor's true name, perhaps to gain power over him. Moreover, it is said that Valdor has created an army of cloned pariahs and summons demons known as Grail, who, oddly enough, are considered benevolent. There are also rumours that he has allies in the form of other custodians and even space marines from various legions. He is simultaneously loathed by Chaos, the Imperium, and in truth by everyone. He resides in his own pocket dimension. The well-known Gregor Eisenhorn, as well as Ravenor, aspire to find the King in Yellow and destroy him. But if it is indeed Constantin Valdor, it is uncertain whether they can accomplish this. In any case, there is still little information about this,